All right, today we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, which is estate planning. The importance of preparing uh, for unforeseen circumstances. And we've got Angela Galliano on the call as well today. And we're going to spend some time talking about why it's important to have a will, the importance of having a power of attorney, and thinking about setting things in place so that if unforeseen circumstances happen, if you get sick, if you're incapacitated, if you unfortunately pass away, your loved ones will be taken care of and they'll know exactly what to do and how to handle your affairs. So we're going to spend some time talking about that, and we're going to show you how easy it is to get organized. So we call this getting our house in order. And this is a part of this is a time of year where everyone starts to thinking about starting the year fresh, getting our finances in order, getting our businesses in order, setting goals. So this should be one that's on everyone's radar. Don't you think so, Angela?
Absolutely. This is definitely the perfect time of year to start thinking about, getting things in order. You can start fresh, you can start new. Usually this time of year, people are getting information together so that they can file their income taxes. So at the same time, you can get all of that information into an estate plan so that you can plan for the rest of your life.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about our backgrounds. Let's start with mine's. I've got 17 years in New York City. I lived there for 17 years there. I was born there, raised there, left there, joined the military. Spent 10 years in the Navy flying airplanes and ended up in Maryland. I've been in Maryland now. That should be 22 years, but I've been here for 22 years. And this is my 15th or 16th year of practicing law. Estate planning, wills, estates and trusts, probate, business, and health. Those are my core business practice areas. And I also hold licenses in real estate as a broker, an insurance broker with the Department of Insurance, and also I'm in the process of finishing up the Series 65 with the Department of Finance. Angela Gallagher, I'll let you talk about your own background.
Well, it's always a little difficult to follow up to you, but I am, yes, Angela Gallagher Galliano. I am born and raised in Mississippi. I grew up in Magnolia, Mississippi. I moved to Maryland about 7 years ago, and I started out at the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office. I was a law clerk there in the Homicide Division and then in the Special Victims Unit. And then I was a prosecutor in the District Juvenile and Circuit Courts of the State's Attorney's Office. The areas that I usually handled were obviously criminal law, anything from CDS or drug possession to firearm possession, burglary, theft, and distribution of narcotics. My areas of practice now are litigation, anything from personal injury to criminal law cases, business law, probate administration, real estate, wills, estates, and trusts, and I also hold a license in real estate.
All right, cool. So you spoke more and longer than I did. You're talking about things I mean, you've got a very impressive background. So there's two sides to our practice. Obviously, there's the planning side, which I personally like to spend most of my time. I find a lot of joy in getting people prepared, and so that they can basically live the American dream. The other side of our practice is administration. And I think that the administration, the probate side, is a direct reflection of the planning side. So folks who plan, their administration is pretty smooth. Wouldn't you say that, Angela?
Yes, I would absolutely agree. And I think that a lot of people don't really think about planning for their lives in terms of a will and powers of attorney until they actually need those documents. And obviously, a lot of times, unfortunately, it's too late to get those documents put in place. But if you just think about it, I always tell people, because the main reason that a lot of people don't really think about it until it's too late is because it makes them uncomfortable. No one wants to think about their loved ones passing. No one wants to think about getting sick and not being able to make decisions on their own. But I always tell people, an hour of being uncomfortable is much better than, you know, the rest of your life with the burden of having to deal with things that aren't taken care of when they could have been.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's more expensive, right? So
Absolutely. Definitely more expensive.
more expensive when you're not prepared, when you don't have a will, when you don't have things organized legally from an estate perspective, because we do a lot of cleanup. There's a big mess that's left behind. And then, you know, if you think about it, it's a time when your loved one's already in grief and it's already chaotic. If you
Yeah.
add this organization to it, it makes it that much more worse. And you open the door for family members to fight. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to some of the particular documents as well.
Okay.
So, you know, at the end of the day, what do we care about the most, right? These are some of the things I care about. What do those things are probably the top things that, you know, at the end of the day, really the things that matter, right? Your health, your family, you know, significant others, your kids, your parents. People always say they work hard. They don't want to work hard forever. So we all want to retire someday and enjoy our senior or twilight years. You know, people care about their pets if they don't have children, and they care about their your relationships are very, very important. And quite often we, you know, in the you know, we get up every morning, we go to work, and you know, the end of the week comes and the end of the month comes, and we do that like over and over and over again. But these are things, you know, these are things that drive us to do the things we do. And if they're that important, we should make sure that those things are taken care of. Don't you agree, Angela?
I do agree. And I think that a lot of times, um, again, going back to why people might decide to hold off on doing things like this and putting these documents in place is because, for example, you mentioned, what do we care about the most? Well, sometimes you might be a single person and yourself, you really are the person that you care about the most. But we might feel like we're being selfish in saying that or admitting that to ourselves. So we're going to hold off, but that's even more of a better reason to have these documents in place, because if you were the only person that you have to worry about, then if something were to happen to you and decisions need to be made in terms of taking care of you, then you need to have those documents in place. Exactly. So that whoever is going to be in charge of, you know, making sure that your wishes are carried out, they know exactly what you want to be done and how you want it to be done.
Yep, exactly. You know, I always say the people that we care about the most get the most of all of our stuff, right? So if we don't instruct folks and tell them what to do with our assets, what happens to it, Angela?
It gets tied up in court.
Yep. And the more it gets tied up, the more expensive it becomes, and the more you have people raising their hand
and you lose the value.
Yeah, and why they have the rights to your assets. And let's not forget that, you know, if you plan accordingly, you can minimize, you know, things like taxes. You can maximize how much your loved ones, how much assets are transferred to your heirs, et cetera. So, you know, most of the time when we pass away, you know, the most important thing that we have is our retirement and our real estate, right? Most of the times folks really don't get the opportunity to get much more saved as far as transferable real assets than their retirement 401k if they have some stocks and their real estate. Right. Sometimes you'll see timeshares in there, but for the most part, those are the two biggest assets. And then is the personal property, right? The chattel, the things that diminish in value, or the things that you have as like heirlooms, family heirlooms, jewelry, the toys, the stuff that we all accumulate. And so you want to make sure that you instruct your personal representative in your will or in your trust through your executor who gets those assets, because you work too hard for it just to be tied up in court and for folks to fight over it. I believe.
Right.
Uh,
Absolutely. I agree.
all right. Now, do you think that there's other things that people forget about? These are some of the things that, sometimes folks, especially if they pass away, they don't tell someone that they have them.
Mhm.
Things sometimes stay in limbo for the longest period of time, right? There's
Right, especially personal property that people don't think will have any value. If you have any loved ones at all, even if you don't have any children, a lot of times people who have children, they assume, well, my kids will just, divide up whatever I have. And that's true, they can do that. But if you don't have documents in place indicating who is supposed to get what or what's supposed to be taken or donated where, then that could cause a lot of conflict within your family. Now, a lot of people will assume, well, my children get along very well. And in most cases, that is very true. But in some instances, grief can do a lot of things to people. It could cause a lot of emotions, and it would just be better and a lot less burdensome on your family if you had documents in place indicating who's supposed to get what. If they're supposed to divide everything evenly, then your documents can say that. It could be as simple as, splitting everything 50-50 between two people or three people or what have you. And I think another thing to point out is that there's a lot of sentimental value that is wrapped up in personal items. So while you may not think that it would cause that much of an issue, your family members might have a different idea about it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just put in place exactly what you want done with your things, then you can avoid a lot of that.
Exactly. And, folks do say that all the time and say, well, I don't have to worry about a will because, it'll go automatically to my kids and they'll be fine.
Right.
But like you said, people, when it comes to things of value, right, they start to get a little selfish, a little greedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't take much for an estate, a small estate to stay on the administrative side is like $50K now, right?
Right, $50,000, $100,000 if you're a spouse.
Right. And so it doesn't take much to trigger that.
Right.
Got a life insurance policy. Obviously, life insurance is going to transfer because you're going to name the beneficiary. You're going to designate who.
Right. Or if you have a house if you have a house and it's mortgage free and that house is worth more than $50,000, then, that's an asset that even under a small estate, you would still have to probate.
Exactly. Small businesses, folks who have residual income, even if it's something simple like, doing taxes, right?
Right.
How much money you make doing taxes per year. You pass away, you've got a whole bunch of people that owe you money. That money is still payable to your estate, and your executor or your personal representative can collect on it, right?
Yes. And I think that to piggyback off of that regarding the mortgage and collecting for the estate, if you die and you do still owe a mortgage on your property, and someone is going to inherit that property, but that property is still subject to a mortgage.
Right.
If you have things in place, then if they need to collect debts that are owed to you because, for example, you prepare taxes, then that money can be used to pay against debts that are filed against your estate.
Exactly. Retirement is transferable. Furniture, clothes. How much money do we spend on consumable items like red bottoms? How much? You know what red bottoms are. I think most of.
I think everybody does.
One pair of what are they called? Christian Louis Vuitton.
Christian Louboutins.
Okay, and so how much is that for one pair of shoes?
$1,000.
Okay, and then the pocketbooks.
Yeah, $1,200 easy for a Louis Vuitton.
Right. And so some people have collection of shoes and pocketbooks and jewelry, etc. And it could add up. It could be very significant. I could see family members really going at it, trying to get the things out the closet. Those are the things that people really want. Computers, electronics, even intangibles like ideas, right?
Trademarks.
Recipes. I mean, a good story is, you've heard of Junior's cheesecake in New York, right?
Right.
Okay. The recipe, right, was handed down through an estate to one of the grandkids, and he.
Oh, I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Now, how much money do you think that recipe is worth? Probably not much.
Uh,
It was in the estate, but after he used it, right now, probably
at $1 million
or more.
or more.
Exactly. So you never know what's of value. So the other thing we gotta think about is how do we get our house in order, right? Where do we start? That's really the hardest part, I think. It's not really like all the stuff done. Um, it's like where do we start, right? I always say, get the right people on board that know what they're doing. This is a good place to start listening to us talk about this topic so you can get some ideas. And just think about doing the little things, right? An ounce of everyone's heard this. An ounce of prevention is greater than a pound of cure, right? It's the little
Hmm.
things that we
Yeah.
do that make the big difference. One little small basic will, 2-pager will just clear the air on a lot of stuff, a lot of headache and heartache and litigation in the future. If you work hard, have a family, or care about helping the next generation, that at a minimum you need a will. At a minimum. I think that's probably the most important document that you can put together is having a basic will. What do you think?
And it's the easiest thing that you can do.
It is. It's so easy. So easy. So let's talk about what happens when our house is not in order. And we see this a lot in our practice, and I'll let you talk about some of these things, Angela.
Okay, well, so just a scenario, simple, straightforward. Someone dies without a will. In the state of Maryland, if you die without a will, then the legal term is that you died intestate. So any property that you owned in Maryland has to be administered through the orphans court, through probate. And that person that is elected to the position over that court is called the Register of Wills. So once you pass, someone will say, let's say, for example, this person died without a will and he is not married. Let's say he has a girlfriend that he's lived with for 5 years. So he has died, and the girlfriend wants to get the house in her name because the house was only in her name. Well, she has to file a petition with the Register of Wills. And because she has no legal relationship with him, she may not be the person who can actually file that petition. The Register of Wills will appoint someone called a personal representative or an executor over the estate of the person who died. So this can be the girlfriend, but if a next of kin or family member, such as a parent or sibling or child of the person who died, objects to the girlfriend being appointed as a personal representative, then they will have to go to court. And the girlfriend will have to let the court know why she should be appointed, and then the person objecting will let the court know why she should not be appointed and why maybe someone else should be appointed. So that's the first sort of red flag to let you know you really need to make sure that you get these documents in place. At the very least, get a will, because you have all of that litigation and cost that your loved ones will have to go through in order to determine who's going to sell your house. Even if the house is the only thing that you have, just to determine who's going to live in your house or who's going to sell your house or who's going to be allowed to do whatever needs to be done to your house. All of that is taking place. And like Richard mentioned earlier, the state is going to call the shots. The court is going to determine who's going to get your property, how much of that property is going to be distributed to that person. And you can avoid all of that by just having a will. Now, to flip the scenario really quickly, if you die and you do have a will, even if all you have in that will is your house, let's say you had a girlfriend, you appointed your girlfriend as the person who's going to receive that property. The house is going to go to her. She's the person who's going to be over your estate, and she's going to make sure that all of your affairs are taken care of. All she has to do is file a copy of your will with the Register of Wills office, fill out a petition, and she'll be granted the letters of administration in order to get that done. A lot of times, some people might choose to do that on their own. tends to get a little complicated because there's a lot of paperwork involved and a lot of legality that goes into place in filing the documents that are required. So I would advise you to, of course, have an attorney do that for you and take a look at, or take a look at the documents that you've already prepared and filed with the Register of Wills. But it can make it a lot more seamless if you have legal counsel. Now, it still does, and it still cuts down on the legal expenses because you're only paying for someone to make sure that the provisions you put in place are carried out, as opposed to going to court and having to fight people to determine even how this is going to be started. So absolutely, dying without a will, it's not the best scenario in any circumstance, and especially when the will is the simplest estate document that you can have.
Yep. And even if you take it for granted, assume that your spouse, you say, for instance, I run across this all the time, right? We see this all the time. You have a spouse and you neglected to have a will, but you forget that you have this is maybe your second marriage and you have kids of your own outside of the marriage, right? From a relationship. Same thing on the other side. And then the kids are, like, well, who gets what, right? You want your kids to get first and then your new marriage family to get, you have to lay those things out in your will to prevent your family members from really going toe to toe with each other. And sometimes it's very unnecessary when they're forced to do that, right?
Right.
So that's like one example, one area where we see a lot of chaos, post someone departing, right? But even if you don't pass away, even if you don't die, and you become sick or incapacitated, like the number one phone call I get that I can't help someone with is when I get the call, or you get the call, Angela, and they say, well, my mom or grandma is in a coma, or they just had a stroke, or something happened to a loved one. I need to get a will, or I need to get a power of attorney, or I need some document in place so that I can pay the bills, so that I can make healthcare decisions, etc. And what's our answer?
It's, well, is the person competent right now?
Right. And 9 times out of 10, if they had a stroke or if they're in a coma, they're not competent, right? They can't make financial decisions, so if they can't do that, they can't sign a power of attorney and give someone the authority to do that. So we're left with what? To go to court, right? We've got to petition the court to get guardianship, and that's real expensive and time consuming. So
yes, it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and there's a lot more involved with just petitioning the court. You file the petition, but then you also have to get reports from doctors, multiple doctors, and file the necessary certificates with the court. So you can avoid a lot of that by having the necessary documents in place.
Mm-hmm. We live in a time now where we have a lot of, non-traditional families, right? Second, third marriages, merged families, children that are not only from existing relationships, from past relationships and adoption. So we want to make sure that, and people always say, no, I love all my kids the same. Well, really? Do you really want to sort of leave that up to the decision of someone else, or do you want to make that decision yourself to make sure that, if you do have a hierarchy, then, the will reflects that, right?
Right.
Executor and the personal representative, they're the ones. I mean, that's a really rough job if you're not organized, because that executor, it's a lot of work to administer an estate, to make sure all the assets are appropriately transferred, to deal with the family members, to go to the bank, to open up the estate account, all the stuff that everyone else is just sitting down waiting for their check, or waiting for their title, or waiting for the car to be transferred in their name because they're going to get it. But the executor is the one really making all that stuff happen. And then if there's disagreement as to who gets what, if there's no will, first of all, the court is going to appoint the executor. Someone's going to be the personal representative. And that person, because there's no will, they got to make decisions. And what happens when they make decisions without a will? No one's happy. right?
No one. Right.
Everyone's unhappy. So they're like the most hated person because everyone thinks that that executor or that personal rep is going to steal all the money. Isn't that typically the case?
Hmm.
You know, um,
Absolutely, every time.
every time they always think that they're hiding the ball. Oh, 3 weeks after the funeral, and all the sorrow and stuff dies down, people start to think about the money. And the executive, the poor executive, is working so hard. Sometimes these estates don't even have any money. The executive is paying out of their pocket, to take care of some of this stuff, and people don't realize that. So, the more organized we are, the easier we make it for the folks that are behind us that are going to take care of our stuff. And I believe in passing the torch. You work hard all your life. You want to make sure that the things that you work hard for go to the right people, right?
Right.
You know, I'm passionate about building a legacy and having my kids get a head start and stand on my shoulders and not have to start where I started from, so that they can get a couple laps in before the gun goes off, right? I'm sure you feel the same way. And this, nobody wants to, get things done the hard way. We want to make sure that we can get our kids in places that's why parents are always bragging about what school their kids go to. And how little Johnny is doing, and everyone's kid is the brightest. They're going to be the next president, and we want the best for our kids. And that's why these things, it doesn't make sense to pay like 15,000 on tuition for private school and not have an estate done.
Right, exactly. And I think to add to that, when you get your estate documents in place, let's say, for example, your children are in private school, who's going to pay for that if something happens to you? If you have an account, if you know that you have enough money to pay for that if something happens to you, then who's going to make sure that that's going to be done if you're not able to make those decisions? So when you get these documents in place, you can get a trust in place that will provide for their education for as long as you want, or for as long as you provide. But if something were to happen to you and you don't have these documents in place, then that private school could turn into some other school, and that other school is chosen by some other person who hasn't been chosen by you to care for your children.
Right. Exactly. So, and then, the thing is this too, right? Debts, right? Some debts that we have while we're alive, if we create an estate appropriately, we should not place that burden on the family members and on the estate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's some debts, obviously, you have to pay IRS, taxes, etc. But 9 times out of 10, you're able to negotiate, either A, write off the debt, have the creditor claim the debt as a bad debt because the estate is not liquid. That's why you've got to do some estate planning to make sure that you don't leave the door open for your creditors to come in and clean out your estate.
Right.
And then if you have a good estate attorney helping your executor, they can negotiate a reduced payoff for the ones that do need to be paid, right? Most times they're willing to accept, pennies on the dollar to close out the account. So the more money we could leave back for your loved ones, for your heirs, for your family members, the better off we are. So, what's the problem? Even though we talk about these things, people are still sort of 180 out of just pulling the trigger and doing a simple will. Why? Is it like selfishness? Is it laziness?
I think that it's a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I think that people are being selfish and not really admitting it to themselves.
Right.
A lot of times we think, well, again, I don't have much, so, I don't need a will. I don't need to have these things in place.
Right.
Or, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. That goes to being lazy. We procrastinate. I guess that's a better word. That's a euphemism for lazy. We procrastinate a little bit. So we put it off and we put it off. Well, I'll wait until this happens, and I'll wait until I finish college. I'll wait until I finish grad school. I'll wait until, I start putting money away in my 401k. I'll wait till I get married. Then I'll wait for children. And then you've waited until it's too late. And that's what we don't want to happen, because you never know when it's going to be too late. Tomorrow could be too late. Tonight could be too late. So I think the problem is that you just have to start thinking about things like this, and don't think about it in terms of planning for the end of your life. Right. It's think about it in terms of planning for the rest of your life. Exactly. In order to plan for the rest of your life, you have to do it today.
Exactly. There's some mistakes that still speak to the living today from people who passed away generations ago.
Yeah.
You've heard the term trust babies, and those
yes.
are speaking very, very loud, right?
Yes, very loudly.
Simple things make a big difference, like checklists, safety deposit boxes, and fireproof safes in the house. They're inexpensive. You can go somewhere like Home Depot or Odd Lots or something and pick up a fireproof box for $25-$30. All your important documents in there. And, I went through a period where, when I first started, and I was just really pushing to get folks like basic wills and stuff like that. And then, I had like a whole bunch of people come in to do estate work. And when they'd come back after they get the will, when they come back after the person that had the estate pass away, the executive would come in, they'd have this plastic bag, and it just reminds me of like when I was growing up, my mom, and I think still till this day, she with all of the paperwork in it. With just, birth certificates, with the awards from kindergarten.
The perfect attendance record.
Yeah, everything that's important, right, goes into that drawer or that side table, compartment or whatever it is. And it's like a big shopping bag. They come in sometimes with 2 or 3 of them. And
our lives are in those drawers.
Yes, that's where the insurance policies are. And you dig through, you see they've been making premium payments on term life, right? And you look through, and then they've got like the bond that they got from, the $50 bond that they got, a whole stack of $50 bonds that they kind of just got for auto deduction from their paycheck when they were working. I mean, there's tons of stuff. Stocks, what would you give to have some, early day Microsoft or Facebook stock, right?
What I wouldn't give.
Some people, some people have, especially people that grew up like in the Depression era, they keep a lot of cash in the house, right? Coffee cans. I always tell folks to, you have to look through the house like you're looking for something that they're hiding. Again, my mom, she keeps cash in the house, right? So she keeps a lot of cash in the house, and she hides it. She tells me where it is, and I'm like, all right, if the house burns down, you can only claim but so much on your insurance. But they just have that mindset. And so checklists, we go through and we ask, the questionnaire where things are. We're not doing this because we want to know personally for ourselves. We're not trying to be nosy, but your heirs and your personal rep needs to know these things so they know how to handle, your estate. Another thing is, like, apart from where the money is where the bills. Who needs to get paid, right? How do you pay the bills? Sometimes we, rob Peter and pay Paul, and you got to let people know you're doing that and how you do it.
Right.
Credits don't go away just because you pass away.
That's true.
Student loans don't disappear. They will go after anything federally backed, IRS, student loans, mortgages backed by the federal government. The list goes on. There's but so much you can do to try to get rid of that. Uncle Sam wants his money back. Cars, the list goes on. Any debt, you've got to list it. And then people who owe you, right? There's personal debt too. People who owe you and people that you owe. I wouldn't be worried about too much to people you owe, but because you're gone. But you come against the estate. People, I mean, how many times do you see estates, especially when they know that the estate is, of high value?
Yeah, if there's any value in the estate, any assets that are in the estate, your creditors will file a claim against your estate. And before your wife or your husband or your children can get any distribution, those claims have to be addressed.
Yeah, exactly. And there's even public notice. We've got to put in a newspaper. Hey, the estate of XYZ is open. If you got a claim, nobody reads things, right? But actually, big corporate credit card companies, mortgage companies, they pretty much, sometimes it's a miracle how they find out the deceased has passed away before the publication period.
I think there's probably maybe a listserv or something that they get. Every time something is filed, they must get some sort of notification of who it is.
Mm-hmm. So, we talked about a lot of different issues. These documents are like the four most important pieces of kind of creating your estate, right? There's two types of estate. And that's, people hear the word estate and they think it's a fancy word for rich people. Really.
Yes, rich old people, and that's not true.
No, it's not. It's not. So, let's talk about these documents a little bit, Angela. The will. Let's start there and why that's important.
Mm-hmm.
If you pass away, do these things. That's what really the will says. If you want to water it down to its basic premise, it says, when I pass away, I want you to do these things.
Exactly. This is where I want my property to go. This is who I want to have my property. This is what I want to happen to my dog. This is, where I put my mother's secret recipe. That's what you want. When you die, do these things. What you would be comfortable with once you're not here to do it yourself.
Exactly. Healthcare directive, right?
This one is really personal to me because I have a friend who had a really bad car accident a year ago, a little over a year ago. And he was very young. He was 28 years old. And he just fell asleep driving one night. And he went from being this 28-year-old culinary expert, hunting aficionado, just really larger than life, sort of Superman-like person, to being completely and totally dependent. He didn't have any sort of life plan documents in place. He didn't have a will in place. He didn't have a healthcare directive. And the healthcare directive would have helped him a lot because once he had the accident, he had to be resuscitated several times. He had to have a blood transfusion, and he lost his left leg, and he was in a coma for over a month. And his mother was the one having to make those decisions without knowing what decision he would want her to make. Eventually, she ended up having to go to court to get a conservatorship over him, guardianship over him, because he's not able to care for himself. And he's in long-term, he's at home now and he's doing much better, but it's been a long road to get to where he is, and he's still got a long road ahead of him. So I think that people tend to, again, think that it's just for older people later in life. Maybe then I'll start thinking about getting something like a healthcare directive in place. But what if that were to happen to you today? Car accidents happen all the time. Even walking across the street, something could happen. It's not to frighten people and turn you into hypochondriacs, but it's just to sort of make it known that this is something that shouldn't be in the back of your mind all the time. It should always be in the forefront of your mind, so that if something happens to you, then people know exactly what your wishes are and what you would want carried out.
I think basically the living will say, if you boil it down, it says, if I can't take care of myself, do these things, right? So you're basically saying, if I'm on life support for months on end and I'm going to forever be relying on a machine just to breathe, and I'm going to be in a coma. I'm not going to be conscious. What do you want to do, right? How do I
Right.
be treated? And there's a lot of different circumstances, right? So we have some people who say, I want to be afforded the opportunity to take advantage of anything that's available, even if it's experimental. But if two doctors or three doctors, say three doctors, 2 out of 3 doctors say he's going to be in a persistent vegetative state, then I don't want to do that. I don't want to
Right.
do this. So everyone is a little bit different, but most people, I think, that I've seen, they want the opportunity to take advantage of things to help them come back. But if they don't see that it's going to be a possibility, they don't want to have that kind of. They don't. That's not really living. You're alive, but you're not living. And so most people articulate. They empower their personal representative to not be on life support, right?
Right.
Um, and it's unfortunate, but there's one case where we had about 3 years now since I had that case, but the client was the wife of someone who had a motorcycle accident, and she's the spouse, but the family, the mother and the family of the husband who had the injury wanted him to, persistently be on a machine. But the spouse not have a living will, but they had that discussion, and the spouse is the one that is in control of making that decision. And so there was a big difference between the family, the mom, and the um, now if she would have had something articulated in writing from the husband, it would have cleared the air a little bit, and she would have been able to say, look, clearly this is in writing, this is what he wants, right? But instead
Right.
they look to her as being the bad guy, right? And so again, these documents really take the pressure off of the person that you empower, because they're just effectuating your wishes. They're not making any decisions. All they're doing is doing what you want them to do, right? The last one is the power of attorney, financial power of attorney. You want to talk about that a little bit, Angela?
I think a lot of times people I think the words power of attorney scare people
Uh-huh.
because right away, the first thing that comes to mind tends to be I'm giving someone the power over my life.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, that is true, but certain things, you can make it so certain things have to happen before someone has that power over you.
Right.
A limited power of attorney, for example, would just cover certain things. Perhaps you only want someone to have power over your property, or you only want someone to have power over your mortgage or over your children, or anything, any sort of your ability to make contracts with anyone. You can limit the power that you grant through a power of attorney. You can give someone complete power over everything. If you were to become incapacitated, like Rich mentioned earlier, if 2 doctors were to determine that you're incompetent, you're not going to recover, or even if you might recover, but just for right now, you're incompetent, you're not able to make sound decisions over your person or your property, then your power of attorney can give someone that power to make decisions on your behalf, pay your bills, write checks from your account so that your affairs are taken care of, continue contracts that you're already a part of, execute contracts that you've already entered into, or end contracts that you've entered into. They have the ability to hire an attorney for you. They can, if need be, arrange for long-term care if you're not able to make those decisions. So just because it's a power of attorney and just because you have a power of attorney in place, while it does grant a lot of power to people, you can limit that power, and you can put restrictions on that power and make it so that it doesn't go into effect until you become incapacitated or incompetent.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things where it could be as scary as you want it to be. In other words, a person could pretty much do anything that you can do, or you can just kind of like carve out specific times and circumstances and areas that they can do things for you on, based on what you can give them as much power or as little
Or as little power
as you want. And
exactly.
control it. So, the power of attorney is important, especially, you could just imagine if you have, a situation where you're incapacitated, your bills need to be paid.
Right.
Need to be paid. I don't know the last time you spoke with your cell phone company or Comcast or any one of these service providers, but I'm calling, it's my account, but I've got to verify with them that I am who I am.
Exactly. They won't even take your money without verification.
No. And so, you can imagine if you're trying to call on behalf of someone else and you don't have their social, you don't have the secret password, the PIN code, or, if you do have a power of attorney, you just fax in the power of attorney or the authorization, it's on file, and then you're good to go. Right.
Right.
You can deal with their financial affairs. So I think that's a major thing for folks that, I get calls all the time. I think the most interesting call I received was the night before someone, the spouse, this is the wife, she calls, and it was probably like 9 or 10 o'clock. And she calls, and it just so happened that I picked up the phone. I was still in the office. And she said her husband is going to prison the next day. So if I can prepare a power of attorney. And I'm like, well, it's late, last minute, but if you really need it, I'll do it. He's got to sign, blah, blah, blah. And, it's just one of those things. We didn't do it that night because I told her that we can still get it done even though he's going to prison, because he could still sign things while he's in prison.
Yeah.
But people don't think about things until the last minute, right? And let's not do that. So, let's get our house in order, like right now. Beginning of the year, 2016, start fresh. And, just start with, filling out a simple estate planning questionnaire. And what we do is the form that you fill out is going to ask you some very simple questions so that we can use it to spot issues. And we use that so we know whether we should use a particular clause in a document, whether or not you need particular language in your documents or not. We think about the things that you don't think about, and that estate planning questionnaire is a starting point for us to build, So at least spend some time talking about these issues. Very, very educational. It brings these issues to the forefront, especially this time of year. And by just filling out the estate planning questionnaire, sending it over to us, and we will look at it, spot some issues, and an appointment for giving you some feedback on where you should start and the documents you may need. You got anything else to add to that, Angela?
No, I just think, all it takes is an hour tops of your time, and I promise you won't regret it. Start fresh. And like I said, think of it as a life plan, and you'll be prepared for anything.
Exactly. All right.